Hi, my name is Cheryl Meyer. I'm a English faculty here at Montcalm. I'm on the Nature Trail Committee, so we do a lot of outdoorsy stuff. I'm also the president of the Chippewa Valley Audubon Club in Mount Pleasant, and we have members from all over the central Michigan area, and also do different events involving people from around the central Michigan area, field trips, presentations, that sort of thing. Little club plug, next month's event here, I will have programs to hand out of our year at the Chippewa Valley Audubon. So that's just a little bit about me. Before we get started talking about Michigan's non-migratory birds, is the couple who was here last month asking about the golden wing warblers here?
Was it
Yep.
Steve? And they're not here.
Oh, bummer. They had asked about the importance of golden wing warblers, just a little quick, that their son lives in the Upper Peninsula and was contacted by the state regarding these warblers that were on his adjacent land. And there was a lot of concern about what these warblers were doing, and they didn't know anything really about these warblers. And I didn't either. So just did a quick look, and the golden winged warblers are actually, they're not quite as nesting specific as a Kirkland warbler, but they do require a specific area for nesting. Parts of northern Michigan are one of those areas. They also nest primarily in Wisconsin and in parts of Canada, and their habitat is diminishing. And so the fact that these folks their son had these warblers on their property, and it's a species of heightened concern, is kind of cool. So, it's too bad they're not here. Well, if they're here next time, I'll tell them about the golden wing warblers. Okay. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about Michigan's non-migrating birds, robins, bluebirds. I also chose for this, drawing a blank. Too much information flowing through the brain. Let's just go to the next page. Cedar Waxwings, sorry. Missed those. And goldfinches. When I was setting this up, I started thinking about all the different birds that don't migrate, and we really have a lot of them. I mean, we've got over 400 different species of birds that do pass through Michigan, but the ones that stay, there are quite a few. So, last month we talked about the summer birds, the warblers, the orioles, the tanagers, and I touched briefly on, the winter birds, the juncos, the snow buntings, the snowy owls that we see. Those are the constant, the migrants, but we often don't think about the ones that are here most of the time, year round, and so that's who we're going to focus on today. Starting with the robin. And, kind of overlooked the robin. And part of the reason when I think about the robin as being such a cool bird is we see it everywhere. And I don't think the robin gets the love it deserves. Last time we talked briefly about how, some people were surprised that robins were here year round. And robins are a little like people. Some of them like to go south. Some of them like to stay north and suffer it out through the winter. And they're also dependent on the food that they eat. So we see them typically as being a spring bird, but not necessarily. So we're going to spend a little time talking about these. The robins are a member of the thrush family, which includes bluebirds, so in the same family. I think part of the reason that we think of robins as being that spring bird is they're the ones we see first, pecking at the worms. We hear them first. They're the most active. Part of the reason, though, is in the winter when they do stick around, they spend a lot of time roosting in trees, trying to stay warm. So they're not out, they're not quite as visible, but as soon as things start to melt and thaw and you start getting the worms going, oh, there are the robins, hey, they're the harbingers of spring. Well, they might have already been here. So, but they're very active in spring. They get along great with people. The robins are everywhere. They are not bothered by our presence. The robins were named by early settlers for European robins that had the red breast. And so kind of carrying on the feel of home, the first settlers named the robins thus. Michigan designated the robin as its state bird in 1931. April 8th, 1931. Yep, have the date up there. Terrible date. Not without a little bit of controversy though. And this is where I go to something else. Hey, more people. Okay, so the robin is the state bird. About a year prior, the Michigan Audubon Society decided that they wanted to work on having the state bird. And so Edith Munger was in charge of that. Edith Munger was the first woman president of the Michigan Audubon. She was president from 1911 to early 1930s. And what she would do is travel around the state asking people what birds they wanted to have as the state bird, and particularly school kids. There was one school in Detroit that wanted to have the kingbird because they felt that it had, the crown, and so it was a bird of royalty, so it should be the state bird. The governor of the state at the time wanted the ruffed grouse to be the state bird. A lot of other people picked the chickadee, the bluebird, the grosbeak, the red-breasted grosbeak was on the list. A whole slew of other birds, and so they put it to a vote. So imagine early 1900s, it was a mail-in, and she got 200,000 mailed in or telegrams on the voting for the bird, for the state bird. And the robin won, about a little better than 20% of the vote. The chickadee was a close second. Third place, distant third, was the bluebird, and then the rest of the birds just were off the map. Well, Edith wasn't very happy about that because what she discovered in talking to people was that most of the people were voting for the robin because it was the most familiar bird. She spent all this time going around the state trying to educate people about all these different cool birds, and they kept going back to that one bird that they kept seeing all the time. And it's this bird of spring, the robin, that doesn't actually migrate, and it's actually a bird of spring. And so she tried to have a revote, and which, when you put it in terms of early 1900s, that's impressive. Because think about how hard it is for us to, do things digitally with, collaboration and communication. And she was traveling physically around the state to get the word out. So she wanted to have a recount, but the House pushed it through, and there was a very unceremonious headline in April of 1931 that, and let me go to the headline, "Nobody chirps as robin wins honor. Tired Senate unenthusiastically named state's official bird." And that's how we got the robin as our state bird. The poor thing. Over the years, it has been challenged. Some school kids in the 70s in the Detroit area petitioned to have the Kirkland warbler be our state bird because it's very specific to the state when you think about the breeding grounds. But people keep going back to the robin. So we've got the robin, for better or for worse, as our state bird. So there it is. Now, part of the reason, and this is my opinion, part of the reason I think we think of the robin as being a bird of spring too is tied into Edith's dilemma with people just constantly seeing it, and so they chose this bird because it's a familiar bird. Everybody knows this bird. And I really think that's why when we see the robin was familiar, it's the first bird we see in spring, and so we just have this association of mud and worms and robins, hey, first bird of spring. And we just don't really notice them in other times. And so that's my assumption, that part of the reason that we constantly are told and taught and think it's the bird of spring is that it's just tied to when we see it.
Well, why don't they come to the bird feeders in the winter then? I never see them in the winter.
That's because they don't like the food you're putting out.
Oh.
Okay.
I have to put worms out for them?
Yeah.
Oh.
That's
No.
part of it.
don't want
That's
to.
one of the things we're going to talk about with, and that's part of the reason I picked the ones that I did. They are a little bit more specific when it comes to food.
Okay.
And robins, now they do tend to wander north to south depending on where the food is, and that's where are getting into trouble lately with the cold weather coming in later and later and later some years, and then they get hit in those cold snaps in January. Everything freezes and there's nothing for them to eat. I remember reading news reports a couple of years ago where robins were starving to death in January and February in parts of the state because there was nothing for them to eat. People were buying mealworms and throwing out, putting mealworms on platform feeders to try and get them through. And so in cases like that, they'll eat mealworms, they'll eat peanuts. I've got a list at the end of different things that you can put out, but because the food isn't available, that's where they kind of get stuck. They also eat, they'll also eat different fruits. I've seen them in flowering crab apples. We've got some ornamental pears in our yard with the little teeny tiny pears, and the robins will go up when they're really hungry and pluck the ornamental pears off of that too, just looking for something to eat. Again, late season. So, even though they're here year round, they do again migrate to wherever the food is. And we get these late winters setting in. So one of the things we're going to do today is cover the things that you can do when you see robins in the winter, if you want to put some stuff out for them. But they're familiar. So anyway, so the robin in spring, and I did a little research to see if there was a very specific reason for why. And I know Katie's said you didn't want me to move so much. Sorry.
You can do whatever you want.
I tried to look to see if there was like a reason for why we're always taught that robins are the bird of spring. I mean, I remember in elementary school doing the coloring of it's springtime and we're gonna color apple blossoms and robins and I can't remember what the third thing of spring, probably a rabbit for Easter or something. But that was, that's what we did. We were taught. Our first bird of spring was the robin. And again, it's not necessarily true. Robins in Michigan all year. This is from Michigan State University Extension. Julie Craves, an avian biologist at the River Rouge Bird Observatory, says that American robins have been present every winter in the University of Michigan Dearborn since she's been counting them in 1993. Now, I think they've been coming a little bit further north as well. Again, a little bit more year-round. Could be tied to climate change, some of the changes in the weather conditions we've been seeing, but they do sort of come and go. They might go as far south as they're going to find food. So vast majority of robins do move south for the winter, but again, not all. So you're more likely to see, a handful of robins over the course of the winter as opposed to the great flocks that we have now. They migrate in response to food more than temperature. So once the ground freezes and they can't find anything, and again, that becomes a problem when we have the quick freezes, those flash freezes that just seem to come out of nowhere. It catches them off guard. Fruit is the robin's primary winter source, and as the ground freezes, they switch or thaws, they switch to earthworms, insects, and the like. While robins may arrive when temperatures reach 37 degrees, it's more dependent on the food. Robins wander in the winter. Temperatures get colder, robins head north, head south, just a little bit farther south as they move. So, again, following that temperature. Most hang out where food is abundant. You'll see them in orchards. Like I said, we've got flowering crabs in our property. We've also got a lot of apple trees that are more for deer than us. And so that's one of my husband's projects, and he's all about quality deer management. So when he's planting these apple trees for his deer herd, it's also benefiting the robins. Because in some years when there's really nothing left, like last winter was terrible, and we were seeing robins in the higher up sections of the fruit trees where the apples hadn't dropped and they hadn't been shaken or knocked down by the squirrels. the robins were up there. And so, you know, that's another way to help the robins get through the year. If you're thinking about planting different trees, fruit trees are a great way to get them food. Questions about robins? Yes, sir.
You mentioned mealworms as a winter source.
Mhm.
Do robins eat frozen worms?
I wondered that too.
That's a really good question. I didn't find anything in what I read about the frozen worms. Anecdotally, I did have friends who were putting out mealworms and suet crumbles for the robins, and they had set up a kind of a platform station, maybe about half the size of this table. And so once the robins got conditioned to them being there, they were getting them quick enough. But I don't know, I honestly don't have a clear answer for that. Because you would assume they would want something that's going to be wriggly, but they might maybe recognize the shape of the worm and eat it in its frozen state. So
Did they eat the suet crumbles?
some of them were taking some of the suet crumbles, and again, this is another anecdotal. When I put suet out for my birds, especially in the winter, I buy beef suet from a butcher instead of buying the packages and then just slicing off the chunks. I've gotten more woodpeckers coming into my feeders that way, especially pileated woodpeckers. They love the fresh suet. But then before I put it out, I'll also crumble some up and put it out on different platforms. And the robins, when they're hungry, and again, this is from friends, birder friend experiences, the robins have come in and pecked it. Bluebirds will also come in and eat the suet crumbles as well. So it's, you know, again, when it's really cold and there's not a lot for them to eat, that's a possibility. But the real suet, or the, you know, this beef suet from the butcher works best in those cases.
Do birds, listen, I don't know, do they have a sense of smell? I mean, if I have never put anything out for robins before, how are they gonna know that it's there? Are they gonna smell that suet and mealworm combo? Because I've never put anything out like that before.
That's a really good question.
I don't even know if they have a sense of smell.
Bird morphology, Michelle?
I
honestly
noticed that
don't know.
eventually they learn. I don't know if other birds tell them or something, because I put something out and nobody will touch it for a couple of days, but then all of a sudden.
Then they'll come.
They
Yeah.
come.
Like evolution curve, like natural selection, I guess they can evolve over time and can,
Figure it out.
Figure it out.
yeah.
And I gotta believe though they do. I mean, they've got nasal passages. I've gotta believe they do have I don't know how advanced their olfactory sensories are in terms of being able to smell. Oh, that's a mealworm versus, you know, especially in January. But maybe it's more of sight. Conditioning them, and again, anecdotally, friends who do a lot of feeding of like bluebirds in the winter will condition them to putting out different foods late in the season. When you've got robins coming in, you know, if you're seeing robins in a particular tree, maybe set up a feeding station right under that tree, and so they're coming down and going into that area. Because I've got to believe in the winter, things don't have it really. I mean, you don't get a lot of scent and smell like you do in summer when it's warm.
Mhm.
So I would believe it's minimal.
Okay.
But I don't know.
I just
I
wonder
need to
how
find
they,
out.
because I never put anything out for them before.
So,
Well-
so Cheryl will know the next time, Pam.
Yeah.
So,
And then I won't be here.
Yes. Well, next time we are going to talk about a little bit more of the feeding and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I will have a definitive answer on the role of
Okay.
scent and smell. Because there are, well, you think about vultures, turkey buzzards, and so heightened sense of smell. Orioles will come to the oranges.
So did you say vultures use their sense of smell to find their dead?
Yeah, they're gonna, but it's a sensory. Not, I don't think it's quite like when we drive past a dead
Right.
deer and.
Or the visual, I think
Yeah.
they use the visual
Yeah.
more.
I'm gonna have an answer for that next time about the sense of
Okay.
smell. Sense of smell, okay. That's a good question. I don't know.
I'll Google it.
Well, no, let me
Okay,
let me
you
put it in
Google
my
it.
presentation. because next I think next month we are talking
About
about
the feeding.
feeding and preparing birds for winter, and so we'll talk about the sense of smell and how to address the frozen things like that as well. But you know, again, anecdotally, friends who were feeding robins, putting out mealworms for them to help them get through the winter really had a huge impact on the health of the birds and getting them through. All right, the next one. All right, so our eastern bluebird is another cool little bird. Eastern bluebirds found throughout the eastern North America and southern Canada, up and down the coast. They're pretty much everywhere. Not as plentiful as they used to be, though. Unlike tree swallows, the bluebirds are not aerial feeders. They don't swoop. I mean, you watch swallows feed, and they just sort of come in and dive, and bluebirds will come in and dive, and then they hover to pick things off. We have bluebird boxes on the meadow loop, wherever the meadow loop is, the paved path. And we have had bluebirds nesting on there. So if you're ever out walking, pay attention to the bluebirds. We also get a lot of tree swallows nesting in those boxes too. And so if you are out there and observing, you can do a little comparison of the tree swallows feeding with the bluebirds. And there's a very distinct pattern. Bluebirds prefer soft-bodied insects. Spiders, flies, dragonflies, caterpillars. Unfortunately, I don't think they do eat the gypsy moths that were everywhere this year. Yeah, they'd be in feeding frenzy right now for that. You know, grubs, moths, crickets, things like that. And again, they're eating a lot of native species. Bluebirds will start laying eggs in April, so they're some of the earliest to nest in the spring. They will start looking for a place to live in March. So typically we clean out the bluebird boxes first part of March, and they'll nest. They'll have a couple of broods over the course of the summer. And again, they're another one that sometimes they leave, sometimes they stay. We've got a pretty sizable little colony of bluebirds over the last few years at my house in Mount Pleasant. They don't live in any of the nesting boxes. They seem to prefer tree snags that we've got all over in one of our woodlots. But I've been seeing them every month of the year for the last couple years. So they're not going anywhere. They seem to be. We've got a field that we planted in a pollinator mix of different seeds and grasses, and they seem to be spending a lot of time in there. So different things to help them kind of get through. Bluebirds back in the 1700s were massively plentiful. A lot of reports, huge populations of bluebirds. And then as different communities started farming, opened up the land, great for bluebirds because they hunt in grassy areas. If you want to encourage bluebirds to your yard, have areas of unmowed grass coupled with areas of mowed grass. And so they can come in and they can hunt that mowed part. It's kind of fun to watch. And so all of these farms going in helped encourage the bluebirds. Fences going up gave the bluebirds something to perch on. So now they're not just having to hover. Hey, they got fence posts to rest on too. So little things that we were doing agriculturally were beneficial. And until about the 1800s, late 1800s, and then we introduced the house sparrow and the European starling because, ornamental birds, they are invasive and they like bluebird nesting boxes. So, and are just a huge problem for the bluebirds. If you are putting out nesting boxes, put out several to encourage both bluebird and house sparrow to live in them. Following the introduction of those guys came the use of pesticides in the early 1900s, and that really led to the decline in bluebird populations because their food supply diminished. There were also all sorts of problems with different toxins that were causing problems with the eggs, killing the birds, and lack of habitat. Bluebird populations really took a hit. But since about the 1970s, they've greatly increased, and part of it's due, well, a huge part of it's due to conservation efforts like the nesting boxes. In the 1930s, a man by the name of Thomas Musselman started the first Bluebird trail, which is nesting boxes along a particular path. That's kind of what we tried to do here, out by the paved path. It's a path that makes sense in my brain, but it's a path set up of the bluebird houses so many feet apart, so that you don't get competition between the bluebirds and other species, or bluebirds with other bluebirds, and just provides a lot of options. And so you set it up on a trail along different open grasses, and ours is small compared to what they were doing, but that greatly helped. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned to me, Cheryl, that they were up off the ground for a particular reason out there.
Yes, you want to keep the bluebird houses up off the ground. They like to nest several feet up, 5 feet up to 20 to 30 feet, depending on how high some of the tree snags are in. And as to help keep predators at bay. If you're putting up houses, you want to make sure that the house size, the hole opening is a particular. Bluebirds have a very specific size, and it just helps to encourage that one species. Chickadees like a little bit smaller and a little bit different shape of the house. They like the depth. Raccoons are huge problems for bluebirds. They like to get in there and eat the eggs and eat the young. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned the invasive birds. How did they get here?
Yeah.
We brought them.
On purpose.
In like cages
Yeah.
or like
Yeah,
birds?
yeah. I can't remember the history of the house sparrow and the starling, but I want to say it was. They brought them into, and again, I'm speculating. I'll look this up for next time. They brought them into New York City and different East Coast towns to bring in what they thought were ornamental birds. And so that, yeah, I mean, that's, well, but you think about how all invasive species get here. Typically, it's, we somehow bring it. But what is it, mute swans are another one that are invasive. And were brought here because they were pretty. The European starling, I can't remember if it was an aesthetic. I don't know if they're necessarily the most attractive bird. Yes, sir.
They rode over on ships.
Oh, were they? The starlings rode over on ships? Okay.
So
Okay.
it wasn't really on purpose, they just kind of
Right here.
hitched rides? That makes more
Hitchhikers.
sense.
Yeah. So just like the zebra mussels, just like any other of our invasive species in the Great Lakes, riding over on ships. Yeah. So, hitching rides. There were some that were brought here and released, but riding on ships. Thank you. Cool. Yeah. So that's how we got here. And it creates problems. And just again, a little side note. Last time we talked, when we talked about the warblers last time, setting up and planting native species. That's why it's so important to have native species for these birds. The different insects, planting things that are going to be readily available for your birds to eat. It's what they're used to. It's not creating competition. All right. Eastern blue. Oh. Hold on. Back. There we go. Okay, so a couple things. Did I have a link on this one? No, it's on the next page. Okay. Like I said, I don't typically do. I'm not a PowerPoint person, so I have too much information on here. Put less information. But this map, this is a fairly current map that shows the year-round. So we're just on the border of the bluebirds' summer migration. Here's Isabella County, Montcalm County, so we're in the year-round range. There's some are a little bit farther north. You'll get some that kind of move up a little bit. Another kind of bane to the eastern bluebird's existence are feral cats. Getting into the nesting boxes, killing the chicks, and we have a terrible feral cat problem everywhere right now. They're causing a huge problem for some of these bird populations, and especially the bluebirds. Another cool thing about bluebirds, though, if you're putting out nesting boxes, sometimes they make nesting boxes with little plastic or glass sides that you can look in the box. It doesn't seem to bother the bluebirds. I've got a Audubon friend who has several little glass-sided nesting boxes on hers. She likes to watch the progress of the bluebird chicks, to see them, to just count the chicks, see how many are hatch, see how they do, and to make sure that they're still there. She also has a problem with raccoons, and it doesn't seem to bother the bluebirds. The adults don't seem to mind. You can also open the sides up and just peek in. Our bluebird boxes here are a little bit tough to get into. You kind of need to have a pretty solid screwdriver to get in them. But again, I've peeked in there and caught a glimpse of their little nests, and they're fairly tidy nests. Bluebirds, very small layer of grasses when they nest. You'll know you have you'll know you don't have bluebirds when you look in the bluebird box and you can see material sticking out the hole. Bluebirds will never just pack their nest to a point where everything is sticking out the hole. If it sticks, you've got wrens, and if it's fluffy things, you've probably got mice in there. There's mice like bluebird boxes.
Can by putting the house up like on a pole, would that help keep the raccoons and such out?
It does a little bit, but
They
they're
can
still
get
gonna,
in
yeah, they're still gonna climb in there. There's different baffles that you can put on to help deter the raccoons. Sometimes keeping them out in more populated areas might help, but there are some holes that will have little guards, so the hole is a little bit longer and it's harder for the raccoon to get in. But if they want to get in and get something, or they'll just wait until the fledglings pop out, and that becomes a problem.
Should you clean the nests out yearly?
Yes, good question. You want to clean them out in the spring before they start nesting. So we usually do the bluebird houses here late February. So, you're out when it's cold, but that's okay. And, just dump them. I just pop them open, scrape them out with a screwdriver, dump whatever's in there, which is usually over the winter mouse houses. Dump all that stuff out on the ground, and sometimes other birds will come and use that as nesting material.
I've always wondered, kind of on Shirma's question, should you be leaving the birdhouse up all year or taking it down at a certain point?
They leave it up all year.
Leave it
That
up
way
all
they
year.
become familiar with it. You might get some coming back to the same spots every year, and other birds can live there too. The tree swallows really like, they'll be nesting in there all summer. You'll have the wrens nest a little bit late. And I'm not going to begrudge a house in January, so I just leave it all up.
There's not my house.
Huh?
Yeah.
They're out there living in my house.
Exactly.
Gonna have the birdhouse down my house.
And that way too, especially if you're monitoring what the bluebirds are doing, if you leave them up year round, you can go and, when you go clean them up in the end of February, early March, before the bluebirds come in, number the houses and then just monitor, okay, which houses had bluebird nests, which, did you see bluebird feathers? What was the nesting material like? And so you can determine, who's nesting where and when. Just helps to kind of keep a record. Plus, some of the houses are a pain in the butt to take up and take down. If you're screwing everything onto poles, that sort of thing. So, just leave them up and put up more. And to encourage, leave snags. Because like I said, most of our bluebirds are living in dead trees. Huge old snags in an old cedar swamp that's at the edge of a fairly multi-grassed, grassy area and a hayfield, and they love it as long as they're protected. Okay, the next bird is a Cedar Waxwing, and these are another one that I don't think gets enough love. And part of the reason I put these guys on the list, last weekend I went tubing with some friends down the Chippewa River, probably through the E. coli section, but you know, it's the Chippewa River and it's always E. coli. And there was a section of, I don't know, about 1.5 miles, 2 miles, that was nothing but Cedar Waxwings, diving and peeping and chirping, and I mean, they were everywhere through coming up out of the trees and skimming the water. And one of my friends said, she said, I didn't know what these birds were. She said, I saw them last year, and I thought they were magic, because I saw these little flashes of red. And so I went home and I got my dad's, or my grandpa's, quite a bit younger than me, she said, I got my grandpa's bird book out and I looked up the bird. She said, it was a Cedar Waxwing. She said, I thought this was just the most magical bird. And so the whole time she's behind me, I keep hearing her talking about this magical bird. And one of the things that she said, and it was kind of echoed by all the other people on our group, were, I thought they migrated. Where do they go in the winter? Do they migrate? And I realized that I too had always thought that they migrated. Because when I would not see them most of the winter, and then I would start to see them when I'd be doing my runs around Mount Pleasant, down in the parks, I'd start seeing Cedar Waxwings. March, April, about the time robins start showing up. So I just assumed that they were also a migratory bird, and they are not. They are a little bit like robins in that when it's cold, they will cluster. They're a very social bird. They're always in flocks. They are never alone. They're a little waxy wing, hence the name, Cedar Waxwing. That is actually a clear coating, waxy coating on their feathers. And bird experts have no idea what it does. Although they have found that the birds with the brightest wax and the most prominent wax get the girl first. So they think maybe it's tied to breeding, but they don't really know. But they're just a cool looking bird. Like I said, always in flocks. The last couple winters, we've had a pretty sizable flock of Cedar Waxwings around the yard. And last winter, when it was so nasty, the Cedar Waxwings would come into this little, what was it, a little elm tree, or no, sorry, it was a, not a buckeye. Chestnut, sorry, American chestnut. They come into this American chestnut, and there were sections of the American chestnut that still had leaves. So the Cedar Waxwings would come in and they would sit in the leaves down low. And so the leaves were about the size of the Cedar Waxwing and about the color, kind of this golden color. And I always knew they were there because I'd see this ring of poop around the base of the tree. And at first I didn't realize it was the Cedar Waxwings nest or kind of roosting there until I was walking my dog past the tree one day, and the Cedar Waxwings were still there. It was early enough in the morning, and as I stepped up into the snow and let out a crunch, the tree exploded with Cedar Waxwings coming out of the leaves. It was insane. It scared the crap out of the dog. Not literally, but it was just such a cool thing to see. And so all winter, when the weather would start to get nasty, they'd go and they'd kind of tuck in around the leaves, but they were always together, always the same flock. And then they're still around all summer. I don't know if it's the same flock, I'm going to assume that it is. They're always in groups. They will sit in trees and swallow berries. Sometimes they'll pick berries and then they'll sit along branches and they'll pass berries from bird to bird to bird until somebody eats it. So it's a little sharing ritual, I guess. They have such a love for berries that sometimes they will eat berries that are a little bit fermented and they will get a little bit drunk, which is amusing, but not necessarily good for them. Sometimes there have been problems with them flying into windows, having problems with a little bit of toxicity. But that's one of their primary meal sources, insects and berries. So again, I think this is why I thought that they migrated in the winter, because primary food source like robins, insects, fruit. For these guys, primarily fruits. They've got a really high, lispy call. If you've ever listened to them, if you see a flock of birds flying way up high, kind of looks like they're in formation, and those to me sound breathless, like they just can't quite catch that air. Those are your cedar waxwings. They like woodlands. They love orchards. So they're probably pretty plentiful around here with all the different orchards that we've got. We do have them on campus. I've seen them and heard them.
I was reading your bottom comment about them passing the berries back and forth and deciding who gets to eat it.
Yeah, and they're always clustered in groups. And I just love that social nature of these birds. I think even more so than some of the others. I mean, a lot of the robins will cluster together for warmth, but the cedar waxwings, and I'm anthropomorphizing them, but they just seem like they're camaraderie. They want to be together. That flock. And maybe it's just a biological imperative that has nothing to do with it, and I'm just putting some human traits on the fact that they're a beautiful bird who likes to have friends. And the fourth, holy cow,
Except they have
pretty close on time. The fourth bird in this is the American goldfinch, and part of the reason I chose them, common bird, everybody sees this bird, but it's so visible in the summer, and then it just sort of disappears into its gray feathers in the winter. And so that's kind of why I chose them. I don't think they get as much love as they need. Plus, they're a seed eater, and so it sort of ties into some of the food. These guys are some of the latest nesters. They're nesting now. They're mid to late summer. They like to use thistle to line their nests. They also like to use the milkweed fluff to line their nests. Reports have found that their nests, which are quite high up in trees, are so densely packed and woven with some of the thistle material that they're actually waterproof, which is pretty impressive for this little bird. They use spiderweb nests. They use different downs. They're one that likes bird baths to do a little bathing. Shallow basin that's easy to access if you want to put a dripper or a fountain out. These guys are dependent again on habitat. Having more native species, letting the thistles grow in your yard, letting the dandelions grow in your yard, letting the milkweeds grow in your yard. These are not only things that they eat, things that they use as nesting materials. It just attracts. They like things like the echinacea seed heads for eating. If you plant echinacea in your garden, sunflowers. If you plant sunflowers in your garden, let them go to full seed and just leave them. It's a great tool for feeding the goldfinches. These guys are here year round, and while they are fairly common, again, sometimes we don't notice them because in the winter, once they just get turned on their drab, non-breeding, bright colors, we don't notice them quite as much, but they're here. They always announce themselves when they fly, which I thought was kind of cool. So apparently you'll hardly ever see a quiet goldfinch shooting through the yard. I've noticed the goldfinches sometimes with the indigo buntings, and slightly, their calls are a little bit similar, but they'll always flying and saying something. And then all the rest that stay here year round. The chickadee, the tufted titmouse, the northern cardinal, the mourning dove. Michigan has over 450 bird species, either here year round. Oh, wrong here, sorry, yikes. Jennifer, don't critique my spelling, wow. Either here year round. Oh, I'm gonna put my thumb over that and ignore it. That's gonna drive me nuts. Migrating through or staying all winter. Backyard bird feeders are a great place to observe all of these birds. And again, if next time we're going to be talking about different feeders and different ways to attract birds, but you can set up feeding stations that help all of these guys year round, but especially in the winter. And thinking about the birds. Side note, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. When I put out bird seed, a lot of times these are the ones I'm thinking about. I put out the thistle for the goldfinches and the pine siskins that come in. The suet for the woodpeckers, the blue jays, the cardinals, the nuthatches, all of that. But it doesn't take much to think about. Okay, well maybe I've got some robins coming in. And so, as it starts getting cold, throwing out some mealworms. If you're seeing bluebirds around, maybe setting up a platform station for some of these other birds. The woodpeckers will come in and eat some of these as well. You'll get different species that'll come in and eat the same thing, but at least it's maybe conditioning them to a possible feeding station to help all of the different birds and not just the ones that are here.
Is the cedar waxwing on that chart?
The cedar waxwing, no, he's
Okay.
not. Nope. And then some tips about feeding. So, feeding robins in winter, mealworms, suet, raisins, crushed peanuts, unsalted, you could put out. And this one helps a lot of the different species. Think about what you're planning. If you've got any landscaping projects that you're working on, maybe put in a tree that's going to produce fruit, maybe an ornamental crab, maybe an ornamental pear that puts up the tiny fruits. Let a wild grape grow in your yard. I know that can be kind of a sketchy thing because they can get really invasive, but those little tiny wild grapes are a great food source. They'll get picked over pretty quick, but at least it's providing something. You can plant raspberries or blueberries or things that you're not going to pick, an apple tree that becomes a food source for these things, for the robins. Bluebirds in winter, mealworms, suet, sunflower hearts, softened fruits, cornmeal muffins can be fed to bluebirds. And during the cold winter, but mealworms are the best because they tend to eat the softer insects. I want to pop to this. If you're really looking to feed bluebirds in the winter, this is a cool site. Come on, link work. This is the Michigan Bluebird Society. And, okay. They have a whole page, Bluebird Feeding 101. And, during May and October, bluebirds can find enough to eat. But when it gets cold, and this whole section talks about mealworms, using in small dishes, training the birds to find the mealworms. Scrambled eggs is another possible food source for them. Suet, they have a recipe here for bluebird suet using lard, peanut butter, sugar, wheat flour, oatmeal, cornmeal, and raisins. My squirrels would have a field day with that. Different seeds, and the different bluebird feeders that you can set up. And so this is a great page, if you haven't looked at it, the Michigan Bluebird Society, and it's Bluebird Feeding 101. lots of great tips. And same thing with cedar waxwings. They'll eat oranges, apple slices, berries. Again, that fruit eater, if it's getting cold and you want to set up a little food platform for them, mealworms on a platform. So you start to see different common feeding. If you've got a platform feeder out, or don't. Maybe as you're heading into winter, get a platform feeder and put something out for the bluebirds, the robins, the cedar waxwings. Cedar waxwings also like grape jelly. Sorry. Just like you put out for your Oreos. They also like applesauce. You can plant some mulberries. I know we all hate the mulberries this time of year when the birds are pooping purple, but it's a great food source. So, you know. And then same thing with attracting and feeding goldfinches. Plant seed-producing plants and flowers. Let the grasses go. Anything that's going to be producing seeds is going to encourage these guys. Provide a clean water source. That's something that we don't think about that much, but to help encourage and keep happy birds. As it gets into winter, get a bird feeder that's got a defroster. They make solar-powered defrosters. Some are just agitators. Some actually warm the whole dish. My mom's got a pretty impressive one. Actually warms everything, keeps the water nice and warm for the birds. I mean, not too warm, so it's not like a little sauna bath for them, but it keeps a water source, unless you've got one. And we've got a small lake that does spring fed, so it does have a couple open spots, and I see a lot of birds getting water there, but I'll still put dishes out for them over the course of the winter. And again, it's important if you're trying to help keep the robins and other birds healthy.